Today I'm going to show you how I created this polymer clay tool holder. So first of all, what you're going to need is a few supplies. So we're going to need one large poster board or 5 pieces of cardstock, depending on how you measure and how you cut, a ruler, some masking tape, aluminum foil, some Bacon Bond or liquid clay, and polymer clay approximately 1 to 1.5 pounds, depending on how many little chambers or tree stumps, whatever you want to call them, you're going to be making. So for this, I've tried to kind of recreate exactly what I have here. So there are 9 little chambers. And first of all, what I did was I measured everything out. And for this, I used cardstock. So what you're going to do is you're going to get your measurements, and then you're kind of going to just make cylinders out of all of your little pieces. And then I tape them together with masking tape. So the next step would be to cover all of these pieces or chambers with aluminum foil. So the aluminum foil is going to strengthen up these little cylinders, and it's also going to give you a little bit of texture for your tree stump. So I'll kind of show you one, and then I will pause this video and let you guys go ahead and get your supplies, and then we'll come back. So basically what I did was I kind of just went over just a little bit. Just roll down, tuck inside, and here we go. We're covered. If you'd like it a little bit thicker and you want more texture, by all means, go for another one. Just cover it, tuck it in, and try to press it as tightly as possible because your tools are going inside of here. So you definitely want it to be smooth on the inside and as flat as possible. So after you have every single chamber covered, what you're going to do next is you are going to cover each chamber with masking tape. So the masking tape is going to make everything a bit more durable and give it some strength, and it also helps the clay stick to this little cylinder. So I will cover this completely, just like we did with the aluminum foil. Make sure everything's flat and tight until everything is completely covered. So I'm going to cover all of my cylinders and I will be back. So for the sake of saving a little bit of time, I covered a few of my cylinders. I'm going to show you how to cover these next couple of pieces. They're going to be the 11 wide by 5.5 high and the 11 wide by 3 inches high. These right here. So first of all, we're going to need a few things. So polymer clay to start. And as I stated before, I did use about 1.5 pounds, maybe a little bit more. And I am using Super Sculpey Original. I find that takes color really well. So if you want to use pre-packaged and pre-colored, by all means do that. I just feel like buying it in bulk in a larger box saves you a little bit of money. So the next thing that we're going to need, it's going to be some tools. So the tools I have some ball tools in various sizes, and that is going to help you kind of smooth everything out. I'm going to call this a spoon tool. I'm not 100% sure what this is actually called, but it kind of looks like a spoon, so we're going to go with that. This is a spoon tool, and that is also going to help you get into the smaller areas and smooth things out. A needle tool, I guess this would be called, and I'm not sure what this is, but it is actually amazing. If you guys are interested, I can put the links to where I purchased everything. Just let me know. And an Exacto knife. You're also going to need some Bacon Bond or some translucent. It doesn't matter actually what color you have. I just have the liquid Sculpey translucent. Okay, so these two pieces we're going to tape together. So I'm kind of just going to match up the bottom the best that I can and kind of give it a little bit of curve. So we're going to just go ahead and tape that together just like we did the other pieces. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look beautiful. You're covering all of this with clay eventually. We're just trying to get it into position. So I've actually conditioned some of my clay just for the sake of saving some time. I am using a Atlas 180 pasta machine. It's actually a little bit wider than most of the standard clay machines. So my sheets are probably going to be a little bit wider than what most of you have, and that's okay. You can work with smaller sheets. It's just going to take you a little bit more time to prepare those sheets and have them ready for your coverage area. So I'm not going to use a whole lot of tape here because most of this is going to be covered with clay. I just kind of want to get it as flat as I possibly can for this. So I feel like this is okay for starters. If I have to add more tape, I will. And for this part, this is where your Bacon Bond or your liquid clay is going to come in very handy, because if you just try to stick your clay to the masking tape, it's probably going to hold and you probably won't have any issues. But I find that the Bacon Bond or the liquid clay works really well to fuse things together. It's really helpful. So I just spread a very thin layer on the edges. Try to get a little bit inside of there because you're going to push some snakes in there later. So just to kind of help form everything and make it look a little more uniform, like it was one piece to begin with versus just sticking some cylinders together and hoping that they fuse. So in the inside, you're going to see these pieces that I've already covered. I'm hoping you can see in here. These pieces that I've already covered, you can kind of see that there's still some cardstock showing, some aluminum foil, and some masking tape. For me, it wasn't important to really cover the inside because this is, for me, it's a personal piece, and I painted the inside of my other one. So if you're really worried about how that's going to look in the end, you can cover this entirely with clay on the inside. I just found that it was, I don't know, I don't want to say wasteful, but I guess it used a whole lot more clay to cover the entire inside, and I just felt like it wasn't necessary because it's something that's sitting on my desk and it's not going anywhere. So normally, if it's something personal, I just don't feel like it's necessary to go ahead and cover the inside. I felt like the painting option was a little bit easier and it saved a little bit of clay. So this piece in the front, I am going to try to cover because it does sit a little bit lower and it's a lot easier to access this area than it would have been the smaller cylinders. So I'm going to just start by wrapping the clay on the top, pulling it on the inside, Just making sure that I get it around the edges and press it down firmly so you know that it's sticking. And I'm going to do this all the way around this little front chamber and the top one. Now, if you have any gaps or any extra white space showing or blank areas, it's really not important to worry about that at the moment. You can kind of make snakes of clay in the end and cover those bits or those small little blank areas up when you're finished. So I'm just going to continue covering this the best that I can. And you're going to find that not everything is going to match up entirely. So you are going to have to go through and you're going to have to smooth the edges down eventually. I find that your finger works really well. Your fingers are excellent tools. And if you have extra, you can go ahead and cut it off with your Exacto knife. So basically, I'm just forming this around and tucking it in and trying to cover as much as I possibly can with these little pieces that I've already pre-rolled. So on my pasta machine, the Atlas 180, I have used setting number 2. I found that that was thick enough to cover up all of the masking tape and the aluminum foil without being translucent and being able to see through it. Excuse me. You'll find when you bake this color clay that sometimes you're able to kind of see darker colors through that with the aluminum foil and that kind of thing. So, and as for the bottom, don't worry about the bottom at this point. We are going to, when this is finished, we will take this entire tree stump tool holder and we are going to place it on top of a few sheets of clay that you will have already had conditioned, and we are going to create a bottom. Now, if you find that your clay is not sticking to the inside, use a little bit more Bacon Bond. The stuff gets kind of messy, so you might want to have some baby wipes or paper towels or a wet cloth handy just to wipe your hands as you work. Okay, so at this point, we are mostly covered. So if you have anything extra, you can kind of trim that off and get rid of the extra. And just kind of finger press everything down together. And don't worry about the flimsiness or it being easily pushed into another shape. You're able to kind of round this back off in the end. So we're just going to kind of smooth everything out the best that we can. I've seen a lot of people use the ball tool. I feel like the fingers work just as well. And you can see that right here, I kind of have a little bit of an air bubble. So I'm going to try to push that out. It's important that you push any kind of air bubbles out. If you don't, when you go to bake, it's probably going to crack. I've had a lot of trouble with cracking. So definitely make sure you've conditioned your clay very well before you start to work with it. I find that 12 to 15 passes through a pasta machine works pretty well. If you don't have access to a pasta machine or a clay machine, a rolling pin does work. I would suggest that you use maybe a piece of glass to work on, or a ceramic tile. My preference is the tile because I find that when you're working on a piece, you don't have to remove it. You can bake it right on the tile, and it just works perfect. So now that I have most of this covered and smoothed out, I'm going to kind of basically show you how I put this together. And I know this isn't perfect at this point. I will go back and smooth as needed and cover up my seams. And so I'm going to get this little air bubble out of here really fast before I forget. Okay, and these areas right here, this is where your ball tools are going to come in really handy. So as you can see, I have enough clay right here, but toward the top I do not. So I'm just going to make a little snake. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're going to blend this in. I'm just going to cover this just to cover my seams. And as you can see, the ball tool helps a whole lot in these smaller areas where your finger or your fingernails may cause a little bit more damage. And this little guy right here, again, I'm not sure what he's called, but he's amazing. And I find that out of literally probably 60 tools, that I use these few tools the most. I feel like they work really, really well. I've also seen people use a wood tool. I have not tried that yet. It does look like it pretty much works the same way as this one. I found that some of the silicone and the plastic tools, they just weren't for me. I see a lot of people that use them and they're happy with them, but I found that this was the best option for me. So, again, this is not perfect, and this is not how I'm going to leave this, but for the sake of time, I'm going to show you how I started forming this and putting it together. And just make sure that if you do have seams, you kind of try to work them as flat as possible. You don't want to see any seams, even if it is just something personal. It's just unattractive. Okay, so I'm going to move some of this stuff out of my way. Okay, so basically, let as I stated before, I pre-covered most of these. So now I'm kind of just going to arrange them. And by all means, if you don't like the way that I arranged it, don't do it. Whatever makes you feel good or whatever you're happy with, go that route. The nice thing about using the cardstock or the poster board is that you can kind of squeeze the edges and you can kind of shape them to fit in however you need. So once you have an idea of where you want your pieces to be and how you want it arranged, you can go back through and you can put a little bit of Bacon Bond or the liquid clay on these areas just to kind of give them a little bit better bond before you start snaking. So I hope you can see this. You're going to see that there's going to be some gaps. This one's a little bit larger than, say, these. So these right here, I will just fill with a little bit of clay. This right here, I'm going to fill with a little bit of aluminum foil. I find that the aluminum foil is a great filler and it works really, really well. And I will stick it down in there just like that. And I will keep building it up just until it's at the same height as these pieces. And then I will stuff the clay inside there. The aluminum foil is going to help you save on clay also by bulking out or filling in your future projects. So now that I kind of have this how I want it to be setting, I'm going to start with this back piece right here, and I'm going to put a little bit of the Bacon Bond on here. You don't need a whole lot. This stuff works really, really well. And I'm going to push this back in. So now I've kind of gone over and I've used a little bit too much. So I'm just going to wipe this off with my finger. And you will not see this once you bake it. It's just kind of an invisible layer in the end, which is nice. Okay, so now that I have this piece here, I'm going to do the same with all the rest of my pieces. And I'm just going to put a little layer and kind of just try to fuse everything together with my Bacon Bond. Sorry, I know it sounds like I'm saying bacon. I'm not. It's Bake and Bond. Okay. Again, just keep repeating until you get all of these little chambers kind of pushed in snugly. Now this one with the first one that I actually did, I did kind of pinch the edges just so it would kind of fit in there a little bit better, and we didn't have such a huge gap. So I'm just going to move this out of the way and then we'll restuff this. And again, like I said, you don't need a whole lot of this Bacon Bond because you are going to snake out a bunch of clay, and you are going to fill these seams, so you don't see any of this in the end. So it's not really important to use an entire bottle. A little bit really, really does go a long way. And the nice thing about this front piece is you can kind of maneuver it however you need to get these to fit. So I feel like I have these in a good position and I have them where I want them. So just press tightly just to try to get them as close as you possibly can. So the next step is going to be, as I showed you before, filling in any areas that may need to be joined without using a whole lot of extra clay. So on this side you can see that we have a bigger gap than we started out on this side. This side seemed to fit a little bit better after we were done. So I'm going to just start stuffing this aluminum foil inside. And like I said before, do not worry about the bottom, because the bottom is something we're going to address after we get all of this done. And just keep trying to push and contain everything. Just try to keep it as close as possible. And your little tools will help you along the way to kind of press this down and pack it in there as tightly as you possibly can. And don't worry about scratching or having a smooth surface. I mean, you can see that some of this is kind of looking rough after we push this down in there, but that really isn't important, because in the end we're going to try to make this look like tree stumps. So tree stumps aren't perfect to begin with. So I have a few snakes of clay that I flattened down just a little bit, and I am just going to press them in. I'm going to use a ball tool to kind of, for starters, pack it down in there. You don't want to use a whole lot of clay if at all possible. You want to keep it thin. I find that the thicker the clay, the easier it is going to be to crack when you put it in the oven. So you don't want any cracking. This project does take quite a while to finish. You don't want any disappointment. Okay, so I'm just going to continue kind of squeezing in a little bit. And I'm going to continue snaking some pieces out, just to give you an idea of how this is going to work. Sorry for all the squeaking. My table squeaks and my chair squeaks. So. Okay, so now that we have a pretty good sized snake of clay, we're just kind of going to press it in there. And then for my first one, I came over the top because I did some vines, so I thought that was a good touch and a good cover up for all of these extra little spaces that we have. So we're just going to keep going with the snakes until we have all of these little gaps covered. And at this point, we're just kind of going to stuff them in here with our fingers. And then we'll go back and smooth everything out when we're finished. Now, if you get to the point where you feel like maybe your first snake wasn't enough, go ahead and pack that down with a ball tool and then add another snake. You can see how when I start to press down, you can see that in this area right here, it's gone back quite a bit further than the other areas. So we'll just go ahead and stuff that with another small piece. Kind of flatten it out a little bit. And again, at this point, nothing has to be perfect. You're going to go back and you're going to find that once you start smoothing these down, you're going to keep adding clay. I mean, you can see every time I push back with my ball tool, it kind of goes in a little bit deeper. You can, if you want to, build these up with aluminum foil. I tried that in the beginning and I didn't like it because it kind of gave it a rougher edge than what I wanted, and I kind of wanted these areas to kind of look smooth versus rough like the rest of the tree stump was going to turn out. So, and the ball tool works perfect to kind of pack this stuff in and get you moving in the right direction that you need to be in. Okay, so I'm going to continue this all the way around until we have all of these gaps filled with snakes. And as you can see right here, I have a lot of free space. So this is definitely going to take a larger piece of clay. So I'm just going to start building up, cover this area and push in. This does not have to be perfectly smooth at this point. Like I said before, you're just, in the end, you're going to come back and you're going to try to smooth everything as best as possible and try to perfect this before you put any sort of texture or anything on there. I like how it wraps around the top. I feel like that was a good touch. It almost kind of reminded me of a waterfall in the beginning. Originally, my first piece was going to be a castle with a dragon on top. And somehow it just ended up turning into a tree stump. I really liked it, so I went with a tree stump. But maybe since I tackled this again, this piece will become my castle. Okay, so now that you have a general idea of how this works, you're going to just continue to cover this all the way around. And like I said, just make sure you're filling it in. This is what's going to, in the end, hold this tool holder together. So you want it to definitely be filled in, and you want to definitely smooth out the seams as much as possible, just so you know that everything is binded together in the end. And as you can see right here, I have a little bit of a rise where it doesn't kind of go, definitely doesn't go flush with a tile. So we will fix all of that also in the end. I will take a snake a lot smaller than what we're working with now, and I will go around the edges. And I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about right now. So we'll just kind of put that in there like that. And this is where this little, I have no idea what it is, this little tool comes in really handy. I mean, it makes a perfect flat edge, and it really does smooth out wonderfully. I'm working with a ceramic tile, and I purchased a little Lazy Susan shelf type of thing at Walmart, like a turntable. I opted to not use the top part because it was about 8 inches high, but I did use the bottom part, and it worked great to set my tile on and be able to turn my work. So if you're looking for something like that, this was perfect versus having to pick up your work and get fingerprints on it or have to move it around a whole lot. And this does get a little bit heavy with the tile and the clay. So okay, so I am going to pause this video, and I am going to create some more snakes, and I'm going to smooth these areas out. And when we come back, I will show you how to start texturing to give the wood look. And again, these little areas, don't forget to build up with aluminum foil. That's important, so you're not wasting your clay and you're utilizing other materials. Okay, I am going to finish this up, and then I will be back in a few minutes. Okay, so now I'm back, and I have everything pretty much covered, and I feel like the seams are pretty much joined. I do have a couple little areas that'll still need smoothing out in the end, but make sure I get to that before I do any baking. Okay, so basically the next step is we're going to add some texture. So for the texture, I'm just going to use this needle tool, and basically we're just going to kind of give it some strokes and just kind of make them random and just pull up. Don't dig too deep. You will definitely run into scratching way further than you expected. If you hold your tool sideways, it seems to work a lot better than if you're pointing it directly at your work. I noticed that if you hold it straight up like I'm doing, you're not going to grab any aluminum foil or cause any holes or any gashes or that kind of thing. So you definitely don't want to stab into your work. So basically, I'm just going to kind of texture everything just like this, just to try to give it the look of a tree. And trees do have knots, and they do have holes and gouges and that kind of thing. So I mean, feel free to add what kind of characteristics you want your piece to have in the end. I just feel like these little strokes are a good place to start. For my first piece, I did a heart with some initials in the middle, and I freehanded the heart. You can leave that out if you don't want to use it. I thought it was a cute little touch since it did resemble a tree. So if you're able to draw a heart, I'm sure you could probably print something out and maybe cut it out, trace around it, that kind of thing. And you just kind of want to do some random strokes here and there. I mean, it does not have to be perfect. You definitely want to, you want it to have enough texture in the end so it actually has some character. And if you notice any air bubbles while you're working, definitely pop those and try to smooth them out. You You will notice that after baking it will bubble or maybe even crack. So just try to prevent that as much as possible before you actually go to baking. So again, for the sake of time, I'm going to only do a couple of these, and then I'm going to show you how I did my vines. So I'm sure you're noticing at this point that I have some larger areas than what we began with in the beginning when we first started. So how this ended up happening was I did my snakes, and the more you push down with your ball tool, you're going to end up with these wider areas, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, this was intentional for me. I like to have this extra space in there because, like I said before, I did the vines and I'm going to have them coming down and maybe running over, that kind of thing. So it kind of gave an extra area to put the vines, the leaves, and the flowers. You don't have to do this. You don't have to spread it out like I did. You can leave it really tight and just cover it that way. But the harder you press down with your ball tool and the more you pack your clay, the wider your area is going to end up being. So it's just all personal preference. I do like to try to do the inside also. I know you're not going to be able to see very far down, but you still do want that look because your tools are going in there, and it is going to be something that you're going to see at least the top part of anyway, if not way down deep on the inside. So okay, so for starters, I think this is good. And I'm going to just leave this little area in the middle blank with no texture, just in case I do decide to add another heart. I'm not sure how that's going to work yet, but okay, I pre-rolled some snakes, and they're a lot smaller than what we used to fill in the gaps. I'm going to use these for my vines, so there's absolutely no rhyme or reason to this. I just kind of let them fall wherever they kind of landed and just push down. Just to kind of give this a little bit more character. So, and I'm going to continue this until I feel like I have enough vine. And shape it however you want to. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything like what I'm doing. I mean, it can be totally different. You can leave the vines out completely. Again, that's all personal preference. I just felt like the vine was a good touch, and I really liked it. So again, with this, I'm not sure what it is, this tool, my favorite little guy, I'm going to take this and I'm going to smooth around the sides. And as you can see, it's blending this in really, really well. I mean, you want this to be blended. You don't want to be able to see seams in the end. You don't want this to just look like you threw a piece of clay on here and you walked away from it. So if you don't have this tool, I'm sure you can find something similar. Maybe try a toothpick, a popsicle stick. I don't know, experiment with what you have laying around. A small, very small ball tool may work just fine. I found that you have a lot of things around your house and your kitchen, just in general, that you're able to use while you're working with clay, things that you probably would have never guessed, but there are a lot of things that you can use for texture and definitely surprise yourself. So after you get your vine on there and you kind of smooth it down, you're basically going to do the same thing that you did with the tree stump. You're going to give it some texture. So I did the same thing, kind of just hold the needle tool sideways or flat, kind of just pull down, do a few strokes. Now I'm not sure if you can see this, but at this point there are some, it's kind of balling up a little bit, and that normally is going to happen because your clay is cooling off. So be sure to keep conditioning your clay. I started this morning. It is now 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So my conditioned clay has been sitting here for quite a few hours. So it's definitely a good idea to run it through the pasta machine a few times or use your hands to kind of warm it up. Okay, and the next thing I did was I created some little leaves. You can do this however you want to. You can leave them out. I just made a little ball, and then you just kind of roll the end like so. It's gonna kind of look like a teardrop, and then flatten it down. Same concept, just lay your tool flat, just give it some lines, just make it look a little more like a leaf. And then I just kind of pushed the edges in a little bit with the needle tool. I just thought it looks a little bit better than just kind of leaving it round. And then pinch the end. So I'm going to do basically the same thing that I did before. I'm just going to kind of push those down, and I'm just going to smooth out around. Just try to push firmly. You want it to stick, and since it hasn't been baked yet, you shouldn't have any issues with that. For some reason, if you do, you can always use a little Bake Bond or some liquid clay, and that will ensure that you don't have any pieces falling off or anything like that later on. So these the end pieces, or the bottom of the leaf, I'm kind of going to flatten those out a little bit because I kind of want a little divot or a little spot for my flowers to set when I get to that point. And for my first tool holder, I used a mixture of pigment powders that I purchased on Amazon. I purchased a huge lot. I believe there were 50 colors for right around $20, and they last a very, very long time. You can dry brush those on before you bake your clay, and this clay actually takes the pigment very, very, very well. So same thing with the flowers. I also did the flowers and the little mushrooms. They were all with the pigment powder, and I really liked how that looked. I mixed several different colors for the green, for the leaves, and for the vine, and then I also the same thing for the actual tree stump itself. I think I used a little bit of gold, some copper, and some brown, and it gives a shimmer. If you're not a fan of shimmer or you don't like the glitter, you can always bake this, and then you can paint your project, and you can use acrylics. There are a ton of different mediums that you can actually use to paint or add color. I've used eyeshadow, like I said, the acrylics. They're all really great. I've seen people mix like the pigment powder or eyeshadow with a glaze or a gloss, which I have some of this. Gloss Glaze, and it's by Sculpey. You don't need very much at all. It gives you a nice glossy finish. And like I said, you can mix your pigment powders with that, your eyeshadow. It's really amazing. It doesn't take a whole lot of eyeshadow or pigment powders to actually get your, sorry, I'm trying to work here too, to actually get your color to where you need it to be. If you prefer, you can do all of your coloring before baking or after. It doesn't matter either way. If you're baking in your oven, my personal preference is I don't paint with any kind of acrylics or paint or anything like that, just because of the smell. It does seem to release a little bit of fumes. I'm not 100% sure if they are toxic or not, but if you're baking in an oven that you cook with also, it may be a good idea to just wait until you're finished to do that. So basically at this point, I mean, we're pretty much finished with this portion, besides adding your details and anything that you may want to it. If you decide after you bake that you do want to add other elements, you can definitely do that. The Bake and Bond is quite amazing. You can use it to add to your current project. I would suggest, if you're going to do that, I've run into a few issues with the pigment powder. It just seems like the clay doesn't want to stick, and it's a bit of a mess after you're putting that pigment powder on. So I guess my ideal way to do this is to just add everything that I'm going to before I actually bake it. So I'll just keep adding these little vines, and I'll keep adding my texture, and then I will add some flowers. So for this, I added rolled flowers. If you have a mold and you can make flowers, that's great too. Whatever your preference is, it should work out just fine. So basically, similar to where we started before, to make a flower, you're kind of going to start out, or a rose. I just did a simple little rolled rose, and I started out with a small snake. And I find if you kind of push down toward the lower end and just keep rolling, you come out with a pretty decent little flower. Absolutely not perfect, but it serves its purpose. Just kind of pull out the edges and pinch it. Okay, and since we haven't baked this yet, we should have no problem sticking this right on. So I'm just gonna kind of use my tool to get it in the position that I want it in. And you definitely want to make sure that you're pushing around your edges. If you can get a tool inside and give it a little push without disturbing the shape or making it look deformed, definitely do that. You want it on there as tight as possible, and you don't want it to fall off in the end. And as I was talking about before, you notice that you get these kind of little, I don't know what you want to call them, little shavings or little ball pieces that start to come off. I noticed that if you use a stiffer little brush, you can kind of brush those off without very many issues and kind of get rid of them. Just keep wiping your brush as you go, or you're going to be dragging that everywhere on your work. So just kind of Just pull off what you can. And in the end, it's not really a big deal. It's hardly noticeable. So I am going to give you a little bit of an idea of how this is going to look with some pigment powder. So you really need just a very, very, very little bit. I'm just going to take a small brush and I'm going to start just kind of dabbing on just a little bit. I'm not going to go very far because, as you see, I haven't textured the entire vine, so. And as you can see, the pigment powder is taking really, really well to the clay. It's just amazing how well it really sticks. Okay, and if you make a mess just like I just did, just take a clean brush and just try to brush away as much as you can. Okay, now for the rose, we're going to take a pink. This is actually called Cherry. And we're just going to do the same thing, just kind of blot a little bit. You don't want to press too hard because then you're going to change the shape of your flower, and you don't want to do that either. And you can always go back over with another color. If you aren't happy the first time, you think maybe it needs to be a little bit darker, you can keep adding to this if you feel like it needs another coat. You can see where I kind of got a little bit of pink on my vine. Just keep kind of going back through and correcting as you go. Make sure when you're doing your leaves that you're concentrating on your edges and the underparts also. You definitely want to make sure that you have everything covered. This is a little bit time consuming because it does take quite a while just to dab every little area. With the pigment powder, I love the shimmer and the glitter effect. I know a lot of people don't. So that's where the acrylic paint kind of comes into play. If you're not a fan of the shimmer or the glitter, maybe a good idea for you to just kind of put all of your elements on, bake, and then paint it when you're finished with your baking. Okay, so next I'm going to go with some brown, just to kind of give you a general idea of how this is gonna look in the end. And like I said, you do not need a whole lot. You can see that this clay takes color really, really, really well. So these small little packages don't look like they're going to go very far, but they really, really do. They last quite a long time. I've done several projects with these, and it just seems like they last forever. So basically, I'm going to do the same thing that I do on the outside to the inside also. You can skip this step if you're planning on painting the inside. I'm not sure if you want to have to paint over top of the pigment powder or not in the end, but I know for me, like I stated before, this is a personal piece, and I really don't care what the inside looks like. Nobody's ever going to see it. If it's a big deal to you and you feel like you just can't get away from it, and it's really something that bothers you, then by all means cover the inside with clay, or paint the inside, or whatever makes you comfortable. I just think this is plenty enough for me, so. And you will notice after you use this powder for a few minutes that your brush does kind of start to stick together, and all of these little bits that I was talking about before that you should dry brush off, they start to kind of get inside of the clay. The clay starts to get inside of your brush, and it kind of makes your brush start to curl up. So definitely have something on hand to kind of wipe off as you go. So my next step after completely covering this with pigment powder is going to be baking it for the first time. So I'm going to bake this twice. The first time I don't want to move this at all, because it's just not easy to move this entire piece as big, as heavy, and as awkwardly shaped as it is without disturbing the form that you already have. So I'm going to bake this, and then we will lift this off of the tile, and we will use a few sheets to put underneath, and then we will trim around with an Exacto knife to create our bottom. So for the bottom, I used the pasta machine on setting 0, so that way we had a thicker base and we didn't have to worry about the integrity or strength or that kind of thing. I mean, you don't want tools poking through or anything, and the bottom really isn't important. Nobody's ever going to see it. You're not going to ever see it unless you're lifting it up and you're looking underneath, and I just don't think anybody's going to do that. You can opt to paint it if you want to, or not. I guess that's just another personal preference. And chalk pastels work really, really great for this. The soft pastel, you would just shave off some of your chalk pastel into a container or a plate or on a surface, and you want to make it as fine as possible. Something similar to a loose eyeshadow or a baby powder or something like that, and that sort of texture. And it works basically the same way as what we're working with right now. And there are a lot of color options out there that work really well. A lot of brands to choose from, so definitely do some research on that and see if you can get a hold of a few of those. Okay, so now that you kind of have a general idea of what we're going for here, or at least what I'm going for, you can kind of go ahead and finish up with any elements or decoration that you want to. If you want to add any other textures or things like that, it would be ideal to probably do that before you bake, would be my suggestion. And now, like I was talking before, I've already covered that with the pigment powder, so I'm going to put a little bit of the Bake and Bond on just to make sure that it's going to stick. Clay just has a really hard time sticking to pigment powder or chalk pastels after they've been covered, so Okay, well now since you have a general idea of how we start with the decoration and the elements and also covering with the pigment powders, I'm going to go ahead and finish this entirely, and then I will come back when it is time to bake, and then we will work on our bottom. Okay, so I've finished my first bake, and as you can see, I added my vines and my rolled roses. This is what the underneath looks like at this point. You can see that there's still some visible aluminum foil and some deformities, kind of looks like, but you won't even notice this after we get finished. So I'm gonna set this aside. This was about two and a half sheets that I used, and then I fused them together just by kind of overlapping a little bit and pressing the seams with my fingers. I did that on both sides. As you can see, I've got a little pigment powder on here, but I'm not going to worry about that because I'm not going to look at the bottom. So this is where a ceramic tile or maybe a glass cutting board or some sort of flat baking surface really comes in handy. You're definitely going to need some kind of flat surface. If you don't do it this way, it may be rather difficult. Not that it's going to be completely impossible, but like I said, I think it's going to be a lot easier for you to do this way. So basically, what I'm going to do is move this out of the way, and I'm going to turn this over. And as you can see, you can still see some aluminum foil and some cardstock, that kind of thing. Like I said before, I'm not really worried about that because I'm not going to be looking at the inside, and I'm not selling this, so it really isn't that big of a deal for me. So if you're worried about that, like I stated earlier in the video, you can paint if you'd like, or cover completely with clay. So at this point, I am going to take my Bacon Bond, and I'm going to use a pretty good amount because I want this to stay. I don't want the bottom to come off. I'm going to bake this right on top of this layer that I've created. So just to ensure that I don't have any issues when I'm pulling it off of my tile later, I definitely want to use a pretty good amount. So just make sure you at least kind of get it even as much as possible. And if you don't have the Bacon Bond, you can use the liquid clay. That seems to work pretty well too. It's kind of heavy, so hard to hold with one hand, and definitely not easy to set up on the other side with all of the uneven little cylinders. So what I'm going to do after this, and I'm just going to basically just set it right on top of my flat sheet of clay, and I'm going to press down rather firmly just to kind of get it to indent in there. Okay. So just kind of position that pretty well so you definitely don't have to make a sheet as big as I did, but just make sure you definitely have enough room to cover the entire bottom. So I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to cut as close as I possibly can all the way around. And if you end up with a little bit extra, don't worry, you can always push that in with your fingers or use a tool or go back with your Exacto knife and cut off whatever extra you have. Okay, so now we're just going to remove the excess clay that we have left over. Okay, and as you can see, there are a couple little pieces sticking out a little bit further, and I don't want that, so I'm going to just push those in. Just try to make it as even as possible. And if you find that you have a larger gap underneath, you can roll out some snakes. I did pre-roll some snakes just in case I have a larger gap. With my first one, it was a good 1/8 of an inch and it was fairly noticeable. And as you can see right here, it's kind of noticeable. So I may very well have to go back in and cover that up with one of my snakes. But this looks rather good. I'm pretty happy with that. And you definitely want to make sure that you are going around regardless how even it looks. You definitely do want to press up and kind of try to blend that together as much as possible. You don't want your bottom falling off when you go to pick it up off of whatever kind of baking base you're using. Okay, so in this area back here, just kind of gonna stick a little bit of clay in there, smooth it out a little bit so it's a little more even. Do the same thing on this side. And then I'll just go back through with my pigment powder, and then I'll color these new little raw areas before I actually bake and give them a little bit of texture so everything matches up. If you have any extra Bake Bond or liquid clay, be sure to wipe that off. You definitely don't want that showing. So I'll just continue around this entire thing until I feel like it's pretty even and it's flush with the rest of the design. And again, I'm not lifting this off of here. I'm going to bake this on. So as soon as I go around and make sure I have all of my little spots filled in, I'm gonna just kind of press down with full force as much as it can handle without cracking or breaking anything. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this, and I think this is as far as I'm gonna go because everything else looks pretty good. So I'm just gonna smooth this out. And then remember to go back and make sure that you wipe off any of your excess liquid. Make sure you're blending this as much as you possibly can, because you don't want it to look like it was two pieces, and you definitely don't want to see a seam when you're finished. So now in these areas I'm just going to kind of try to make it match up the best that I can. Kind of blend it in a little bit. Okay, now I just want to press this down as firmly as possible, especially in the middle, since I'm not able to blend that in without lifting it up. Okay, and then I have a little bit of pigment powder that I was working with, so I'm going to go back through and just touch up these few little areas so it doesn't look like I have raw clay. And it's easier to do when it's wet, so. And this is really nice. I haven't put any kind of clear coating or any gloss glaze or any kind of protection over it yet because I'm going to bake again, and honestly I just don't know how safe that is in an oven that I'm cooking with. So, but after this is all finished, I will go back through and I will touch up some of these flowers and some of the vines that are discolored or maybe lost a little bit of color due to it being a powder and not being able to blend. But the nice thing is you can see the areas where it already previously baked excuse me, and I put this the powder on before. You can kind of see where you can just kind of erase with a dry brush if you got a little extra, or it comes off, so it's not going to completely stain your project like it would had you used a paint prior to baking. So that's always nice. You can kind of go back and clean up your areas or add a little bit more color. So okay, I think I have everything pretty matched up and pretty happy with how it looks. So I think we have enough color. So I am going to stick this in the oven for the final bake, and then I will come back and show you what the product looks like entirely finished. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you in some way. Hopefully you're able to have yourself a nice little dust companion for all your little tools when this is all done. Okay, finished, off to bake. I will be back to show you the finished product. Okay guys, so I've completed my final bake and this is what my bottom looks like. So absolutely not perfect, not pretty, but as I stated before, you do have the option to paint if you want to. So here's my inside. And pretty much complete except for going back through and adding a little more color and putting some gloss over top of it, just because I don't want this pigment powder to come off on my fingers or rub off eventually. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the video and I really truly hope it helps you. Thanks for watching.